Hi, I'm Meg Hanish, and I'm here to talk to you about natural disasters, succession, and climate change, or how well can our ecosystems stand up to a changing climate? So here's the overview of what I'm going to talk about. First of all, what happens to ecosystems after natural disasters, then succession and why recovery time is so important, climate change, and how often we're going to have disasters, what this means for ecosystems and society, and finally, what we can do about it. First of all, I want to show you a few pictures. Here's a coral reef before and after a hurricane blows through. El Yunque National Forest, which is America's only national park with a tropical rainforest, before Hurricane Maria and after. The Amazon rainforest, before a wildfire on the right this time, and after. And Yosemite National Park, before a wildfire and after. As a bystander or as someone who loves the beauty of these places, events like this can be shocking or heartbreaking, but as ecologists, or at least people taking an ecology class, we know that natural disasters, or to use the ecological term, disturbances, are a normal part of an ecosystem's life. Succession follows disaster, and ecosystems bounce back. They are, as one researcher described rainforests, in a perpetual state of disturbance and regrowth. But I wouldn't be talking to you about this if there wasn't a bigger issue at play here. So here's the problem. Even though disturbances are natural, sometimes ecosystems don't bounce back to the same place they were before. And sometimes that's okay. But it seems that, thanks to a number of interlocking factors, more and more ecosystems are facing exactly the kind of disturbance patterns they most struggle to recover from. We all know how succession basically works. Plants start out small, grow and prepare the way for a different set of plants, usually more complex. That set does the same for the next one, that set does the same for the one after that. Eventually, you reach a climax community, or a disturbance happens and resets the environment to an earlier stage of succession. This is true no matter what kind of disturbance it is: fire, hurricane, tornado, logging, you name it. However, there are a couple of important pieces to how well succession works in achieving a particular ecosystem after disturbance. Kind of like evolution, succession isn't goal-seeking. It doesn't really care what kind of community it builds in the end. But we as humans do place value on, say, a rainforest regrowing from the ashes of a rainforest, or coral reefs growing on the beds of the old reefs. To do that, you need at least two things. A big one, and one that nature already has covered, is having species that are resistant or resilient to the kind of disturbances they face. For example, rainforests that often face hurricanes have trees that grow shorter and sprout faster than rainforests that don't. They bounce back. And the forests in the western US often have trees that not only can survive wildfires, but need fire to reproduce. Non-resilient species often fail to do well in such environments, so they don't make it. You end up with ecosystems that are usually fairly well adapted to the environmental selection pressures they face. And the second important factor, which turns out to be really critical, is enough time to build back up to the community you had before. In some ecosystems, like prairies and coral reefs, recovery time is pretty short, on the order of months to a few years. But in others, like forests, especially rainforests, it can take decades or even centuries to grow back, especially when exposed to a disturbance that the ecosystem isn't adapted to handle, like fire in the case of rainforests. And the more often disturbances happen, and the more intense they are, the harder it is for the ecosystem to recover. In other words, if you keep burning down your forest, eventually there won't be a forest. You might have grasslands of some sort, a prairie maybe, but you're applying selective pressure that works against the type of ecosystem you had before. You're changing the environment in a fundamental way. In one study surveying the recovery time of coral reefs after disturbances, it was found that while reefs that experienced major but infrequent disturbances often recovered over a few years, but the reefs that faced major or minor but frequent disturbances often did not. Similarly, forests, which usually take longer to recover, tend to deteriorate when they're exposed to frequent disturbances, especially those they're not prepared to face, like fires in the Amazon, which I mentioned before, which occurred naturally after hurricanes, but increasingly are also caused by humans. You could think of it like you're trying to build a house of cards while someone is shaking the table. You might be able to get pretty far if they only bump it now and then, even if it's a really hard shove when they do. But if they shake the table more often, even if it's not very hard, you probably won't get to the same point as you could before. So why am I bringing attention to the time dimension? Well, short answer is that time is the one thing that ecosystems increasingly have less of. We can think of disturbances as falling into two categories if we want. Natural disturbances like natural disasters, as well as less dramatic things like insect infestations, diseases, and so forth, and then disturbances from human activities, things like logging, hunting and fishing, and pollution. Climate change is a little bit of both. Human-caused, but it affects ecosystems on a global and almost unpreventable scale. Climate change is an important contributor to natural disturbances. In addition to causing changes in ocean acidity and sea level, which damage sensitive marine ecosystems, the warming temperatures also give rise to stronger and more frequent patterns of extreme weather. Combined with increasing human contact with previously isolated ecosystems, which leads to more of the human activity type disturbances, this lines up almost exactly with the constant shocks disturbance model I mentioned before, the one that's hardest to recover from. We're already seeing the results of these changes. Rainforests are seeing fires every 5 to 10 years, where before it was maybe once in 500 years. That's a pretty big difference. Droughts leading to greater fire risks and more intense fires are also striking the western United States more often. Bigger and more frequent storms are hitting coastlines all over the world, not just the North Atlantic like in this graph, and they're also often hitting harder. Not only that, but this pattern is also only predicted to increase. In short, ecosystems everywhere, especially the ones we consider most iconic, the ones that are least affected by human presence, like national parks, are under greater stresses than ever before. So why does this matter? In ecological terms, it may not. I've already mentioned that neither natural selection nor succession have an end goal, and change is a constant in nature. However, we as humans have a vested interest in preserving our ecosystems, both for aesthetic and even ethical reasons, and for economic ones. Livelihoods and whole industries, billions of dollars worth, especially in the Pacific Islands and the Amazon basin, also depend on preserving the tourism, resources, and ecosystem services provided by these ecosystems, and that would be plenty in itself. But to me personally, this problem hits home for 2 reasons. One, like probably most of us, I love the beautiful places of the world, national parks especially, and ever since elementary school, I've found that one of the things that concerns me most, personally, is whether they will be protected and conserved for the future. I chose my major, which is Sustainable Systems Management, which is the long way of saying that I want to help people take care of the Earth, based on the concern that they won't be. I'm passionate about the beauty of the world, and I'm even more passionate about doing what we can to protect it. That and my knowledge of how climate change might make it harder was what drove me to this issue. If there's one thing I'm motivated to fight for, it's this one Earth that we have. But I can't do it alone, obviously. So what do we do together? Where do we act, and what do we tackle first? I propose a 3-tiered action plan that involves multiple levels of actors. At the national level, many steps are already being taken, mostly in the nations which have a stake in threatened ecosystems. These are enabling the resources to protect and study different locations, and in some ways our own national parks are already participating. But a big step that the US hasn't taken, or at least has backed out of, is participating in global climate action. Without seriously committing to addressing one of the major causes of extreme disturbances, we can't ultimately be successful, so I would love to see the US back in the Paris Agreement, for example. At the regional level, I recommend investing further in conservation programs to implement best management practices. Steps like this have proven to help ecosystems bounce back after disasters before, as maintaining a healthy ecosystem in the first place increases its resilience to disturbances. And at an individual level, advocacy for the programs that would implement these greater changes is critical, and you can visit national parks and other protected areas to help fund their programs as well. You can also do your part to live green, but I'm sure you've heard that a million times before. And here are my primary references, part 2, and secondary references in part 2. Thanks very much.